Translators Introduction. At present, there are a number of sophisticated theoretical introductions to the works of Francois Laruelle available in English. So, here we will limit ourselves to questions of translation. See especially Anthony Paul Smith, Laruelle, A Stranger Thought, John O. Mallorca, All Thoughts Are Equal, Laruelle and Non-Human Philosophy, 2015, Alexander R. Galloway, Laruelle, Against the Digital, 2014. In the French original, three of the text's key terms are brought into even closer dialogue by their parallel rhyming forms: mystique, pragmatique, topique. Unfortunately, the structure of English means we have not been able to preserve these echoes consistently. When mystique is an adjective, we have rendered it as mystical. When it is the noun, le mystique, as the mystical. And when it is the noun, la mystique, as mysticism. When pragmatique is an adjective, it is pragmatic. When it is the noun, le pragmatique, the pragmatic. And when the noun, la pragmatique, pragmatics. When topic is an adjective, we have rendered it as topical. When the noun, le topique, the topic. And when the noun, la topique, topics. What is thereby obscured in English is the parallelism between la pragmatique, pragmatics, and la topique, topics on the one hand, and la mystique, mysticism on the other. Although others have translated la mystique as mystics in the works of Michel de Certeau, for example, mysticism remains closer to the meaning that la mystique normally carries in French. For example, la mystique renan, the 13th and 14th century mystical movement that includes Meister Eckhart, Henry Suso, and Johannes Thaler, among others, is usually referred to in English as German mysticism. The one time in the text that Laruelle uses the term mysticisme, it is polemical, along the lines of the term obscurantism. We have made this different usage clear in the text. In another case, the differences between French and English grammar and the precision of Laruelle's terms have forced us to stretch English conventions. Laruelle uses three different French terms: individu, individuelle, and individuale, for which the English individual is the appropriate translation. However, because each of the three terms does different theoretical work, we have found it necessary to distinguish between them in our translation. In one case, using a neologism that echoes Laruelle's French and evokes what we take to be his debt to Heideggerian terminology. Our terms are as follows. First, we translate the standard French noun for individual, individu, as individual. Second, we translate the standard French adjective for individual, individuelle, as individuel, preserving the L of the French. Third, Laruelle coins the peculiar adjective individuale, a term we suspect is modeled after Heidegger's distinction between existential and existential. Like the noun individu, we translate this form as individual. Context will make clear which is the noun and which is the adjective. Of primary importance for the reader is the fact that the awkward English individual is in fact a translation of the common French adjective individuelle, whereas the deceptively familiar adjective individual translates the neologism individuale. This counterintuitive distribution of familiar and unfamiliar is necessitated, at least in part, by the stress Laruelle puts on the A in individuality when he writes it as individuality. Moreover, by translating Laruelle's term individuale as individual, we avoid what Laruelle himself is trying to avoid, namely, leaving the duel, the contest between two adversaries so central to philosophy, in the individual. Laruelle's particular use in French and thus our distinctive translations in English of a group of terms related to thought and reflection also deserve explanation. While irreflecti has a standard meaning of thoughtless or unconsidered, we have rendered it as unreflective so as to capture the critique of the specular found throughout the text and also to retain some of the strangeness of Laurel's usage. Whenever unthought appears, it translates impense, while reflecti usually becomes reflected or reflective rather than its more common definitions. A number of terms that are likely to stand out to the reader are indebted to Heideggerian thought and the way it has been translated from German into both French and English. Indeed, translating this book has made us realize that the responsible translator of contemporary French philosophy really ought to have read at least Heidegger and Kant in French translation. We outline some of the most important Heideggerianisms here so that the reader understands their philosophical baggage. Although the standard meaning of the French éloignement is remoteness, when Laruelle uses the hyphenated term éloignement, he is referencing a Heideggerian terminology that has its own highly particular meaning and translation history. Éloignement is the standard French translation of Heidegger's Entfernung, number 23 of Being and Time, which we have following Johann Stambaugh's English translation of the same text, rendered as de-distancing. For the same reasons, we translate éloigné as de-distanced. Laruelle draws a distinction between things, comme tel, and tel quel. The former is the standard French translation of Heidegger's als solcher, which is usually given in English as such. For example, chapter 5 of division 1 of Being and Time, Das Insein als solches, is translated into English by Stambaugh as being in as such, and by Emmanuel Martineau into French as l'être à comme tel. We have respected this, rendering comme tel as such, in contrast to tel quel and its variants, which we translate as it is, as they are, as he is, etc. A similar term, which appears less frequently in the text, en tant que tel, we translate as is. We have rendered originaire as originary, but it should be noted that in Martineau's translation of Heidegger, originaire often translates ursprünglich, which is usually given in English translations of Heidegger as primordial. The French sense can be translated into English as both sense and meaning. Thus, for example, the phrase logique du sens is most commonly known to English audiences as the title of Deleuze's The Logic of Sense, while L'essence de l'être is the standard translation of Heidegger's Sinn von Sein, which in English is usually rendered as meaning of being. Both of these are obliquely referenced in the exposition of Theorem 113 below. Unfortunately, in English, there is no way to capture in one word the divergent denotations sense and meaning. So, we have rendered sense as sense when it is used in colloquial expressions, in the sense that, etc. But when sense is used technically, as in chapter 4, we translate it as meaning, as is clear from the mention of Deleuze in the final bullet point. Larouellian terms are also frequently related to the terminology of French thinkers, while other is almost always a rendering of the French outre. The several times autrui, other person or other people, appears in the French original, it is either implicit or explicit reference to Levinas's ethical thought. When necessary, we have drawn attention to the distinction between outre and autrui, and for the verb survoler, which has the standard meanings of to fly over and to skim through, we have followed the precedent of other translators, for example, Hugh Tomlinson and Graham Birchall's in their translation of Deleuze and Guattari's What is Philosophy, and rendered it as survey throughout. The other meanings of the term should, however, be kept in mind. More generally, we have translated the prefix sur, which appears throughout the text, sometimes as sur and sometimes as over, depending on readability. A few final translation decisions should be noted. We have rendered scission throughout as scission for consistency, but readers should keep in mind the more common meanings: division, separation, split. We have rendered Occidental as Western, but compounds such as Greco Occidental have retained their original inflection and have become Greco Occidental. Additionally, we have rendered the French mixte in two different ways: in the adjectival form as mixed, and in the substantive form les mixte as mixture rather than as the mixed for readability. Finally, readers will encounter both a priori and a priori in the text. Both forms appear in the French original, and while their usage is not consistent throughout, it is clear that a priori functions predominantly as a noun and a priori as an adjective or adverb. In our translation, we have altered spellings when needed to regularize the pattern. After this lengthy explanation of complex terminology, we offer one very simple word to those who helped us with this translation: thanks. Daniel Hoffman, Anthony Paul Smith, Andrea Gadbury, Sanders Creasy, Dario Rudy, Kelsey Leopard, and Ben Tran all generously shared their time and expertise with us as we translated. Their help was invaluable.